"Daddy, you forgot your ring," whispered the maid's toddler. The widower billionaire froze. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse with such fury that Alexander Hayes barely heard his own footsteps echoing through the marble foyer. At 33, he'd built an empire that spanned 3 continents, yet he moved through his own home like a ghost haunting the remnants of a life he no longer recognized. His wedding ring sat on the hallway table where he'd placed it that morning, as he did every morning now. 6 months had passed since the accident that took Rebecca, and the gold band had become too heavy to wear, weighted down by memories that threatened to pull him under with every breath. Alexander reached for his briefcase, his mind already cycling through the merger documents awaiting him at the office, when a small voice cut through the storm's roar. "Daddy, you forgot your ring." He froze. The word struck him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Slowly, he turned to find 3-year-old Emma Martinez standing in the doorway to the kitchen, her tiny hand clutching his wedding band. Her dark curls were still damp from her morning bath, and she wore yellow pajamas decorated with sunflowers that seemed absurdly cheerful against the gray morning light. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm not," he began, his voice rougher than intended. "Emma, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes." Sophia Martinez appeared behind her daughter, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she scooped the toddler into her arms. At 29, Sophia had been his housekeeper for only 3 weeks, hired by his assistant after the previous staff had quit, unable to handle his grief-stricken moods and unpredictable schedule. Sophia was different from the polished, professionally distant staff he usually employed. She'd come to the interview with Emma in tow, desperation evident in her eyes as she explained that childcare had fallen through and she hoped he might consider the circumstances. His assistant had nearly turned her away on the spot, but something in Sophia's quiet dignity had made Alexander pause. Perhaps it was the way she held her daughter close, protective and gentle, or the absence of pity in her eyes when she glanced at Rebecca's portrait in the hallway. She looked at him like he was simply a person, not a tragedy to tiptoe around. He'd hired her that same day. "It's fine," Alexander said, though his hands trembled slightly as Emma reached toward him, the ring glinting in her small palm. "But Daddy needs his ring," Emma insisted with the absolute certainty that only a 3-year-old could possess. "Mommy says rings mean someone loves you all the time, even when they're far away." Sophia's face went pale. "Emma, baby, we talked about this. Mr. Hayes isn't." She looked at Alexander, her brown eyes filled with apology. "I'm so sorry. She's been confused since we moved here. Her father left when she was just a baby, and I think being in this family environment, seeing the photos of your wife everywhere, she's created this story in her head. I'll talk to her again." Alexander should have corrected Emma firmly, should have maintained the professional boundary that had kept him functioning these past months. Instead, he found himself staring at this child who looked at him with such innocent certainty, as if believing something with enough conviction could make it real. "I left my ring on purpose," he heard himself say, his voice gentler than it had been in months. "But thank you for noticing, Emma." The little girl's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire being, and Alexander felt something crack inside his chest, the first fracture in the ice that had encased his heart since the funeral. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, clearly mortified by her daughter's behavior. "Come on, sweet pea. Let's go finish your breakfast, so Mr. Hayes can get to work." As Sophia carried Emma back toward the kitchen, the little girl peered over her mother's shoulder, still clutching the ring. "Will you wear it tomorrow, Daddy?" she called out. "So, love comes with you?" Alexander stood frozen in the foyer long after they'd disappeared, the sound of Emma's voice echoing in the cavernous space. The penthouse had been silent for so long, filled only with his footsteps and the ghostly memories of Rebecca's laughter. Now it held something else, a child's voice calling him Daddy, a title that had died with the future he and Rebecca had planned. He should have been bothered by it. Should have insisted Sophia correct her daughter immediately. Instead, He found himself picking up his briefcase and heading toward the elevator, Emma's words following him like a lifeline he didn't know he needed. At the office, Alexander moved through meetings with his usual precision, but his mind kept drifting back to the penthouse. To Emma's small hand holding his ring like it was treasure. To Sophia's embarrassed apology and the worry in her eyes. To the strange warmth that had flickered in his chest when Emma smiled. His assistant, Margaret, noticed his distraction during their afternoon briefing. "Is everything all right with the new housekeeper?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "She's fine. Very thorough," Alexander replied, shuffling papers without really seeing them. "And her daughter?" "I know it's an unusual arrangement, having a child in the residence. If it's causing any disruption." "It's fine," he repeated, more sharply than intended. Then more softly, "It's actually fine." Margaret raised an eyebrow, but wisely said nothing more. When Alexander returned home that evening, earlier than he had in months, the penthouse was transformed. Not in any dramatic way, but in small details that spoke of life being lived within these walls. A stuffed elephant sat on the hallway bench. The faint scent of homemade soup drifted from the kitchen. And somewhere in the distance, he could hear Sophia's voice singing softly in Spanish, a lullaby that wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He found them in the kitchen, Sophia washing dishes while Emma sat at the island, carefully coloring in a princess coloring book, her tongue poking out in concentration. "You're home early," Sophia said, surprise evident in her voice. She quickly dried her hands on a towel. "I can reheat your dinner. I made extra soup if you'd like some." "Soup would be nice," Alexander said, surprising himself. He usually ate at his desk or skipped meals entirely. Emma looked up from her coloring, her face breaking into that same radiant smile. "Daddy, did you have a good day at work?" Sophia winced, opening her mouth to correct her, but Alexander spoke first. "I did, thank you," he said quietly, pulling out a stool at the island. And as Sophia ladled soup into a bowl with shaking hands and Emma chattered about the pictures she'd been drawing, Alexander realized that for the first time in 6 months, he'd told the truth. He'd had a good day. Because he'd had something to come home to. The next 3 weeks passed in a pattern that Alexander hadn't anticipated, but found himself unable to resist. Each morning, Emma would appear as he prepared to leave for the office, often carrying something he'd supposedly forgotten: his briefcase, his phone, once even his tie, which he'd been wearing the entire time. But always she called him Daddy. And each time, Sophia would apologize profusely, her face flushed with embarrassment as she tried to explain to her daughter the difference between wishing and reality. But Emma remained unmoved by logic, operating on the simple 3-year-old principle that if she wanted something badly enough, it must be true. Alexander had stopped correcting her after that first week. He told himself it was easier than watching Sophia's mortification or hearing Emma's confused tears. But late at night, alone in his bedroom with Rebecca's photograph on the nightstand, he knew the truth. Emma's innocent insistence that he was her daddy had become the only thing that made him feel human anymore. It was a Wednesday morning when everything shifted. Alexander emerged from his bedroom to find the penthouse unusually quiet. No small footsteps, no cheerful chatter, no Sophia's voice humming Spanish melodies as she worked. He found Sophia in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, viciously scrubbing a counter that was already spotless. "Where's Emma?" he asked, and the roughness in his voice came from more than sleep. Sophia jumped, clearly not having heard him approach. She swiped quickly at her eyes. "She's sick. High fever. I called my neighbor to watch her at our apartment." "I'm so sorry for being distracted, Mr. Hayes. It won't happen again." Alexander frowned. "You left a sick 3-year-old with a neighbor?" "Mrs. Chun is wonderful with children. She used to run a daycare." Sophia's voice was defensive but strained. "I can't afford to lose this job, Mr. Hayes. I know the arrangement was already unusual, bringing Emma here every day. I couldn't possibly ask to stay home or bring a sick child into your home. Why not? The question emerged before Alexander could stop it. Sophia stared at him. Because you hired me to keep your home, not to bring my problems into it. Because you've already been incredibly generous allowing Emma to be here at all. Because... Her voice cracked. Because I can't afford to presume on your kindness any more than I already have. Alexander thought of Emma's smile, of her small hand holding his wedding ring, of the way the penthouse felt alive again with her presence. He thought of how Sophia had transformed his home not just with her cleaning, but with signs of warmth he hadn't realized were missing, fresh flowers in vases, curtains open to let in light, the smell of real food cooking instead of the catered meals he'd been living on. Go get her, he said. I'm sorry. Go get Emma and bring her here. She should be somewhere comfortable where you can actually take care of her, not with a neighbor while you worry yourself sick. When Sophia continued to stare at him in shock, he added more gently, Please, Sophia. Let me help. 30 minutes later, Sophia returned carrying Emma, who was wrapped in a blanket and burning with fever. The little girl's eyes were glassy and unfocused, her usually bouncy curls limp with sweat. Daddy, she whimpered when she saw Alexander, reaching for him with one small hand. Without thinking, Alexander took her from Sophia's arms. Emma was so light, so fragile, and her skin was frighteningly hot. She tucked her head against his shoulder with complete trust, and Alexander felt his heart constrict painfully. The guest room on the second floor has the best light and quietest position, he said to Sophia, already moving toward the stairs. Set her up there. What else does she need? The day became a blur of cool washcloths, children's medicine carefully measured, and whispered conversations as Emma drifted in and out of feverish sleep. Sophia tried repeatedly to take over, to insist that Alexander return to work, to his normal life. But he found himself unable to leave, anchored by the weight of the sick child who kept reaching for him, murmuring, Daddy, even in her sleep. It was late afternoon when the fever finally broke. Emma's eyes fluttered open, clearer now, and she looked up at Alexander, who sat beside her bed while Sophia had finally agreed to take a short break. You stayed, Emma whispered, her voice hoarse but wondering. Of course I stayed, Alexander said, adjusting the cool cloth on her forehead. My first daddy didn't stay. Mommy says he had to go on an adventure without us. Emma's words were simple, but Alexander could hear the echo of Sophia's careful explanations, trying to protect her daughter from the harsher truth of abandonment. I'm not going anywhere, Alexander heard himself promise, and the words felt like a vow. When Sophia returned, she found them like that. Alexander sitting vigil beside Emma's bed, reading to her from a children's book he'd ordered delivered from the nearest bookstore, Emma's small hand wrapped around his finger. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Hayes, you don't have to. Alexander, he interrupted quietly. When it's just us, please call me Alexander. That night, after Emma had fallen into a healthy sleep and Sophia had reluctantly agreed to use one of the other guest rooms instead of making the trek back to her apartment, Alexander found himself in his study, unable to sleep. He pulled out his phone and looked at photos of Rebecca, something he'd been avoiding for months because the pain was too intense. Tonight, though, he looked at her smiling face and felt something different than the crushing grief that usually suffocated him. He felt gratitude for the time they'd had, sadness for the future they'd lost, and something new, permission to keep living. I don't know what I'm doing, he whispered to her photograph. I don't know if it's okay to feel less hollow. I don't know if it's betraying you to let these strangers into our home, into the life we were supposed to share. He paused, tears streaming down his face. But Emma called me Daddy today, and I didn't want to correct her. And I think that has to be okay. I think you'd want that to be okay. The apartment was silent except for the sound of the city outside, but Alexander felt something ease in his chest. Rebecca couldn't answer him, but somehow he knew the truth. She'd never want him to stop living. She'd loved him too much for that. The next morning, Emma appeared in his doorway as he prepared for work, still pale but smiling. "Daddy, you forgot your ring again," she said, holding out the gold band. Alexander looked at the ring, then at Emma's hopeful face, then at Sophia standing behind her daughter with an expression he couldn't quite read. Slowly, deliberately, he took the ring from Emma and slipped it onto his right hand instead of his left. "How's that?" he asked Emma. "A different place, but still with me." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "Love travels," she declared with the wisdom of a 3-year-old. "Mommy says love goes where it's needed." Alexander's eyes met Sophia's over her daughter's head, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both broken people learning to piece themselves back together, and that somehow, impossibly, they might be helping each other do exactly that. "Love travels," Alexander repeated softly. And for the first time since Rebecca's death, he left for work wearing his wedding ring, and didn't feel like he was drowning. The spring rain gave way to early summer sunshine, and with it came changes that Alexander couldn't have anticipated. Emma's illness had broken something open, the careful professional distance he'd maintained, the walls he'd built around his grief. Now the penthouse felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home. Emma had claimed him completely. She waited by the elevator every evening when he came home, launching herself into his arms with shrieks of "Daddy" that echoed through the marble foyer. She insisted on showing him every drawing, every new word she'd learned, every discovery she'd made in her small world. And Alexander found himself looking forward to these moments more than any business triumph. Sophia watched these interactions with a complex mixture of emotions that played across her face: gratitude, worry, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. She tried repeatedly to establish boundaries, to remind Emma that Mr. Hayes was not her father, but Emma was unmoved by reason. "But he loves us," Emma would insist with the absolute certainty of the very young. "I can tell. He smiles now." And it was true. Alexander did smile now, small expressions that cracked through the grief stone his face had become. Margaret noticed, commenting that whatever had changed in his personal life agreed with him. His business partners remarked on his renewed focus. But Alexander knew the truth. He was learning to live again, one small moment at a time, guided by a 3-year-old who decided he was worth saving. It was a Saturday morning in early June when everything crystallized into clarity. Alexander had no business meeting scheduled, no crisis demanding his attention. He wandered into the kitchen to find Sophia teaching Emma to make pancakes, flour dusting both their noses as they laughed together. "Daddy," Emma squealed. "We're making breakfast. Want to help?" Sophia immediately moved to usher Emma away. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes, Alexander. I know it's your day off. We can take this to the staff kitchen." "There is no staff kitchen," Alexander said, rolling up his sleeves. "And I can't remember the last time I made pancakes. Emma, what do I do first?" What followed was chaos. Burnt pancakes, flour everywhere, Emma insisting on cracking eggs herself, with predictably messy results. But through it all, Alexander laughed. Actually laughed, deep and genuine, and when he caught Sophia's shocked expression, he laughed harder. "I'm a disaster at this," he admitted, surveying the destruction. "The worst," Sophia agreed, but she was smiling, really smiling, and Alexander realized it was the first time he'd seen her truly relaxed in his presence. They ended up ordering breakfast delivery and eating together at the kitchen island, Emma chattering between them. And it felt so painfully normal, so achingly like a family, that Alexander had to excuse himself for a moment, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. He found himself in the living room, staring at Rebecca's portrait above the fireplace. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. "I don't know if this is moving forward or running away. I don't know if I'm dishonoring your memory or finally honoring the life you'd want me to live." Talking to yourself or to the portrait? Alexander turned to find Sophia in the doorway, having followed him. Emma was absorbed in a cartoon in the next room, giving them a moment of privacy. Both. Neither. Alexander ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. This morning was inappropriate. I'm your employer. I shouldn't be inserting myself into your personal time with Emma. Is that what you think you were doing? Sophia moved closer, her expression serious. Alexander, you've given Emma something I couldn't afford to provide: stability, space, joy. You've given me a job that allows me to keep my daughter with me instead of in daycare for 10 hours a day. And you've become... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. You've become present in our lives in a way that clearly helps you as much as it helps us. Emma calls me Daddy, Alexander said, the words rushing out. And I let her. I encourage it by responding. I know I should correct her, establish boundaries, but I can't seem to make myself do it. I know, Sophia said softly. And I've stopped trying to correct her because I've realized something. Emma's father left before she could walk. She has no memories of him, no connection. She's been looking for that missing piece her whole short life. Sophia met his eyes steadily. And you've been looking for a reason to keep living. Maybe you found each other at exactly the right time. I'm terrified, Alexander admitted, of what I'm feeling, of what it means, of betraying Rebecca's memory, of hurting Emma when she realizes I'm not actually her father, of hurting you if this all falls apart. Sophia stepped closer, and Alexander could smell her perfume, something light and floral, completely different from Rebecca's sophisticated scent, and therefore somehow easier to breathe around. Can I tell you about Emma's father? Sophia asked. I've never told anyone the whole story. Alexander nodded, sensing this was important. His name was David. We met in college. I was studying business administration, working 3 jobs to afford it. He was charming, attentive, made me feel like I mattered. Sophia's voice was steady, but tinged with old pain. When I got pregnant, he promised we'd figure out together. He proposed, made plans, seemed excited. Then one morning, when Emma was 6 weeks old, I woke up to find him gone. Not just gone for the day, gone. He'd cleaned out his half of our apartment, left a note saying he couldn't handle being a father, and disappeared. Sophia, I'm so sorry. The worst part wasn't even that he left, Sophia continued. It was that I'd been so sure he loved us. I'd believed every promise, built my whole future around this family we were creating. When he left, it shattered something in me, my ability to trust my own judgment about people. Yet you're here, Alexander said quietly, working for a grief-stricken stranger, letting your daughter attach to him. Sophia smiled sadly. Because Emma is wiser than I am sometimes. She saw something in you that I was too scared to acknowledge. Someone who's capable of showing up, who keeps his promises, who honors commitment even when it hurts. You wear your wedding ring on a different finger now, but you still wear it. You're still married to Rebecca in all the ways that matter, honoring her memory by trying to live in a way she'd be proud of. I don't know if I'm doing that, Alexander said, his voice rough. You are. Sophia's voice was firm. By letting Emma in. By learning to smile again. By being present instead of just existing. Rebecca must have been an incredible woman to have loved you. I think she'd want you to keep being the man she fell in love with. Someone capable of love, of connection, of fatherhood even if it comes in an unexpected form. They stood in silence for a long moment, and Alexander felt the truth of her words settling into his bones. He looked at Rebecca's portrait again, and for the first time, he felt her blessing rather than her ghost. I want to do something, he said suddenly. For Emma. Would that be okay? Sophia looked uncertain. Alexander, you've already done so much. It's her birthday next month, isn't it? July 15th. I saw it in your employment file. You remember her birthday? I remember everything about both of you, Alexander said, the admission surprising him with its honesty. I want to give her a real celebration. Here in the penthouse. Invite whoever she'd want, friends from the park, your neighbors, whoever matters to her. Tears filled Sophia's eyes. Alexander, that's too much. We can't possibly. Please, he interrupted gently. Let me do this. Let me give her something good. Let me be the person she thinks I am. Sophia studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. But on one condition. Anything. You let me help you with something too. What? Sophia gestured toward the living room, toward the wall of photographs of Rebecca that Alexander had maintained like a shrine. You don't have to take them down, but maybe we could add some new photos too? Some current ones? This apartment should hold both your past and your present. Rebecca should be honored, but life should be lived here too. Alexander's first instinct was to refuse, to protect the shrine he'd built. But then he thought of Emma's laugh echoing through these rooms, of Sophia's quiet presence making everything feel less empty, of the way he'd started to feel human again. Okay, he whispered. We can do that. That afternoon, they took photos, silly ones of Emma making faces, candid shots of her playing, a few of the three of them together that Sophia insisted on using the timer for. When Alexander looked at them later, he was struck by his own expression. He looked alive again, tired and grief-touched still, but undeniably alive. He printed one of the photos, Emma on his shoulders, her hands in his hair, both of them laughing, and placed it on the mantel beside Rebecca's portrait. The two images together didn't feel like a betrayal. They felt like a bridge between who he'd been and who he was becoming. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Alexander's phone rang. It was his mother, calling from their home in Connecticut. Alexander, darling, Margaret mentioned you've been leaving work early. Are you all right? I'm okay, Mom. Actually, better than okay. Really? His mother's skepticism was evident. She'd been worried about him since the funeral, calling constantly, suggesting therapy, grief counseling, anything to help her son who seemed determined to work himself to death rather than feel his loss. There's a little girl, Alexander found himself saying. Her name is Emma. She's 3. Her mother works for me, and Emma has decided I'm her father. Silence on the line. Then, carefully, Alexander, is this healthy? Getting attached to someone else's child? I don't know, Alexander admitted. But Mom, she makes me laugh. She gives me a reason to come home. When she calls me Daddy, I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore. Oh, sweetheart. His mother's voice cracked. Your father and I have been so worried. You've been so lost. I know, but maybe I'm finding my way back. Just not on the path I expected. They talked for another hour, Alexander telling his mother about Sophia, about Emma, about the strange new life that was taking shape in his grief-haunted penthouse. And when he finally hung up, he felt lighter than he had in months. The next morning, Emma was waiting by his bedroom door, holding his wedding ring. Daddy, you forgot. Actually, Alexander said, kneeling down to her level. I think I want to wear it every day now. But I need help. Will you help me? Emma's face glowed with delight as she carefully handed him the ring and watched him slip it onto his right hand. Now love goes everywhere with you, she declared. Yes, Alexander agreed, pulling her into a hug. Now love goes everywhere with me. Over Emma's shoulder, he saw Sophia watching from the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her face. And Alexander realized that somewhere in the past few weeks, without quite meaning to, he'd started building a new family from the broken pieces of his old life. It wasn't replacement. It wasn't betrayal. It was survival. It was healing. It was love learning to travel forward instead of staying trapped in the past. Emma's 4th birthday party transformed the penthouse into something Rebecca would never have recognized, and Alexander found himself grateful for the change. Balloons in every color bobbed against the high ceilings, a bouncy castle, over Sophia's protests about the expense, dominated the living room and children's laughter filled spaces that had been silent for too long. Alexander stood near the windows, watching Emma hold court among a dozen neighborhood children, and felt Rebecca's presence not as a weight, but as a warmth. She would have loved this, he thought. She'd always wanted children, had dreamed of filling their home with exactly this kind of chaos. "You did good," Sophia said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of punch. "I haven't seen her this happy since, well, ever. She deserves it." Alexander accepted the cup, but didn't drink, too focused on watching Emma explain to another child that my daddy had arranged everything. The words still sent a jolt through him, part joy, part terror at the responsibility he'd somehow accepted. "Alexander?" Sophia's voice had changed, become uncertain. "There's something I need to tell you. I've been putting it off, but it's not fair to keep it from you any longer." His stomach dropped. "What is it?" "David, Emma's father. He contacted me last week." Sophia's hands were shaking, punch sloshing in her cup. "He says he's changed, wants to meet Emma, wants to be part of her life." Alexander felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first, which is crazy, I know. He's her legal father, and you're my employer, and I have no right to involve you in this decision, but—" Sophia's words tumbled out in a rush. "But you're the one she calls daddy. You're the one who shows up. And I don't know what to do." Before Alexander could respond, Emma ran over, tugging at his hand. "Daddy, come play. We're having a dance party." "In a minute, sweetheart," Alexander said, smoothing her hair. "Go ahead and start without me." Emma bounded away, and Alexander turned back to Sophia. "Does Emma know about him?" "I've always told her that her biological father had to go away, that he loved her but couldn't stay. I never wanted her to feel abandoned." Sophia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But Alexander, what if he really is changed? What if he deserves a chance to know his daughter? What if I'm being selfish by wanting to keep him away?" "What do you want?" Alexander asked quietly. "I want Emma to never be hurt again," Sophia said fiercely. "I want her to have a father who shows up, who keeps promises, who makes her feel safe. I want—" She stopped, seeming to realize what she was about to say. "You want what she already has," Alexander finished for her. "Here. With us." Sophia met his eyes, and something passed between them that went far beyond employer and employee, beyond housekeeper and resident. It was understanding, recognition, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "That's not my decision to make," Sophia whispered. "She has a legal father. I can't just deny him access because someone else has stepped into that role." "Then we meet him," Alexander said, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "Together. We hear what he has to say, we assess whether he's genuine, and we put Emma's well-being first. Not his rights, not our feelings, hers. You do that? Get involved in this mess." Alexander looked across the room at Emma, who was spinning in circles with her friends, her face radiant with joy. "Sophia, I'm already involved. I've been involved since the first morning she handed me my wedding ring and called me daddy. I'm not walking away from her now. Not for anything." The party continued around them, but Alexander felt the shadow of what was coming. That night, after the guests had left and Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by new toys, Sophia and Alexander sat in his study, her laptop open between them as she showed him the messages from David. "I've changed," David had written. "I was young and scared and stupid, but I've grown up. I'm financially stable now, I have a good job, a nice apartment. Emma deserves a father. I want to make this right. What does making it right look like?" Alexander asked, analyzing the messages with the same scrutiny he'd apply to a business contract. "Does he want shared custody? Visitation rights? What's his end goal?" "He wants to start with meetings, supervised at first, then gradually building to weekends, maybe more." Sophia's voice was hollow. "He's talked to a lawyer. He knows his rights." "Then we get you a lawyer too," Alexander said immediately. "A good one." Someone who will protect Emma's interests. Alexander, I can't afford. I can. He raised a hand to forestall her protest. This isn't charity, Sophia. This is me protecting someone I care about. Both of you. Let me help. Over the next few weeks, Alexander found himself in territory he never expected to navigate. Lawyers' offices with Sophia, her hand trembling in his. Consultations with child psychologists about the best way to reintroduce a father who'd been absent. Tense phone calls with David, who grew increasingly frustrated at the barriers being erected. I have legal rights, David said during one particularly heated call that Sophia had patched Alexander into. You can't keep me from my daughter. No one's trying to keep you from her, Alexander replied, his voice steel-wrapped in silk. We're ensuring that when you meet her, it's in a way that protects her emotional well-being. She's 3 years old. She has no memory of you. You're a stranger to her. And who are you exactly? David's tone turned nasty. Sophia mentioned some boss who's gotten too involved. What's your relationship with my daughter's mother? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alexander's eyes met Sophia's across his desk, and he saw his own uncertainty reflected there. What was their relationship? Employer and employee felt absurdly inadequate. Friends didn't capture it either. They'd become something else entirely, bound together by grief and hope and a little girl who decided they were family. I'm someone who shows up, Alexander said finally. That's what matters to Emma. The meeting with David was arranged for a Saturday morning at a neutral location, a family therapist's office with a play area designed for supervised visits. Alexander had offered to stay away, to let Sophia handle this alone, but she'd clutched his hand and asked him to come. I need you there, she'd whispered. Emma needs you there. You make us feel safe. David arrived exactly on time, and Alexander's first thought was how ordinary he looked. Mid-30s, conventionally handsome, wearing a business suit like armor. He looked like someone trying to project success and stability, and Alexander recognized the tactic because he'd employed it himself countless times. You must be the boss, David said, not offering his hand. David Morrison, Emma's father. Alexander Hayes. He kept his voice neutral. I'm here to support Sophia and Emma.
Right.
Support. David's smile didn't reach his eyes. Generous of you to take such an interest in your employee's personal life. Before Alexander could respond, the door opened and the therapist appeared with Emma, who'd been playing in another room with Sophia. Emma's eyes immediately found Alexander, and she broke free from her mother's hand to run to him.
Daddy.
You came. The word hit David like a physical blow. He stared at Emma, then at Alexander, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that might have been pain. Emma, sweetheart, Sophia said, her voice strained. This is David. He's someone special who wants to meet you. Emma barely glanced at David, too focused on showing Alexander a toy she'd been playing with. Look, Daddy, it's a dinosaur. The lady said I could play with it. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Alexander said, kneeling to her level while acutely aware of David's stare burning into him. The therapist, Dr. Chun, stepped in smoothly. Emma, why don't you show David the dinosaur too? I bet he'd love to see it. Emma considered this, then walked slowly to David, holding out the toy with the wariness of a child approaching a stranger. Do you like dinosaurs? She asked. I love them, David said, and Alexander heard the emotion cracking through his voice. You're so big, Emma. So beautiful. I'm 4 now, Emma announced proudly. I had a birthday party. Daddy made a bouncy castle appear in our house. Each time Emma said, Daddy, David flinched. Finally, he looked up at Alexander with undisguised hostility. You've been teaching her to call you that? I've been teaching her nothing, Alexander said quietly. Emma makes her own decisions about what to call the people in her life. She's 3 years old. She doesn't understand. 4, Emma corrected seriously. I'm 4 now. I had a birthday. Dr. Chun intervened, guiding the conversation into calmer waters, explaining how these visits would work, what the goals were. But Alexander could see the war brewing in David's eyes, the realization that he'd come back expecting to reclaim his daughter only to find someone else occupying the space he'd abandoned. The visit lasted an hour, carefully supervised, with Emma gradually warming to David while still returning to Alexander's side whenever she felt uncertain. When it was over, David pulled Sophia aside while Alexander took Emma to get a snack. "This isn't over," Alexander heard David say, his voice low and angry. "He's not her father. I am. And I'm going to prove I deserve another chance, whatever it takes." That night, after Emma had gone to bed in the guest room she now thought of as hers, Sophia and Alexander sat in a study, both emotionally exhausted. "He's going to fight for custody," Sophia said, staring into her glass of wine. I could see it in his eyes. "He's not here because he's changed. He's here because his ego can't handle being replaced." "Then we fight back," Alexander said simply. "Alexander, he's her biological father. The courts favor biological parents. And I'm just a single mother who can barely afford rent without this job. What if he wins? What if I lose her?" "You won't." Alexander moved to sit beside her on the couch. "Sophia, you're an incredible mother. You've given Emma everything she needs to thrive. Any court will see that." "But I can't give her what you can," Sophia said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't give her a fancy penthouse or private schools or birthday parties with bouncy castles. I can't compete with what David could offer if he wanted to, or what you've already given us. And I hate that money matters, but it does." "Then we make sure money isn't an issue," Alexander said. "We present a united front. We show the court that Emma has a stable, loving home with us. That she has everything she needs." Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this? Really? You've already gone so far beyond what any employer would do. You've let us live here. You've paid for lawyers. You've become a father to a child who isn't yours. Why?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because Emma saved my life. Because she walked into my home and decided I was worth calling Daddy when I couldn't find a reason to keep breathing. Because you both made this mausoleum feel like a home again. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being my employee and became family." "Family," Sophia repeated softly. "I know it's complicated," Alexander said quickly. "I know the power dynamics are messy, and I'm your employer, and there are 1,000 reasons this is inappropriate. But Emma doesn't care about those things. She just knows that I show up, and I keep my promises, and I love her." "You love her," Sophia whispered, and it wasn't a question. "I do," Alexander admitted. "I love her completely. And he stopped, unable to finish the thought, unable to articulate the other feelings growing alongside his love for Emma. Sophia reached out and took his hand, the gesture simple but heavy with meaning. "She loves you too. She's never known a father before, never had someone who made her feel like she was the most important thing in the world. You've given her that." They sat in silence, hands clasped, both aware that everything was changing and neither certain where it would lead. Outside, the city blazed with lights, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in the penthouse. But inside, in the quiet space between them, a new family was being forged, not from blood or legal ties, but from choice and commitment, and a little girl's unshakable belief that love could travel anywhere it was needed. The custody battle that David threatened never materialized quite as expected. Over the following months, as supervised visits continued, a truth became increasingly apparent. David wanted to be a father in theory, but couldn't handle the reality of fatherhood. He showed up late, left early, became frustrated when Emma was tired or clingy or simply 4 years old. By October, his visits had become sporadic, his excuses increasingly transparent. "I've got a work thing," he'd say, or "traffic is terrible," or simply wouldn't show up at all, leaving Emma waiting by the window and Sophia seething with protective fury. Alexander watched this pattern with a mixture of relief and rage. Relief that David was revealing his true character, rage that Emma was being hurt by another father's abandonment. After the fourth missed visit, he found Emma curled up in his study, trying not to cry. "He forgot about me again," she whispered when Alexander sat beside her.
"No, sweetheart."
He didn't forget. He made a choice, and it was the wrong one. Alexander pulled her into his lap, his heart breaking for her. "And that's not about you. You're wonderful and lovable, and any father would be lucky to have you. David's choices are about him, not about you. But you choose me," Emma said, looking up at him with eyes too wise for 4 years old. "You choose me every day. You're my real daddy, right? Not the kind that forgets." Alexander felt something settle in his chest, a decision that had been forming for months crystallizing into absolute certainty. "Yes, Emma. I'm the kind that stays." That evening, after Emma had cried herself to sleep, Alexander found Sophia in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning counters that were already spotless, her way of processing anger and pain. "We need to talk," Alexander said quietly. Sophia turned, and he could see the exhaustion in her face, the toll that months of legal limbo and David's inconsistency had taken. "If this is about the custody situation," the lawyer said, "it's not about that." "Well, not exactly." Alexander took a deep breath. "Sophia, this arrangement we have, it's not sustainable." Her face went pale. "Are you asking us to leave?"
"What? No."
"God, no." Alexander crossed to her quickly. "I'm saying that you living here as my housekeeper while I act as Emma's father figure. It's confusing for everyone, including Emma. We need to formalize this somehow. Make it official." "Official how?" Alexander pulled out his phone and brought up a document he'd had his lawyer draft. "I want to legally adopt Emma. With your permission, of course. I want to be her father not just in her mind but on paper, in every way that matters. And I want you to stop being my employee." Sophia stared at him. "Alexander, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere in the past 9 months, you and Emma stopped being strangers living in my house and became the reason I have a house at all. I'm saying that I love Emma completely, and I want to protect her and provide for her and be her father in every sense of the word." He paused, gathering courage. "And I'm saying that what I feel for you has grown into something I don't quite know how to name, but it's definitely not how an employer feels about his housekeeper." Sophia's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "You can't mean this. We're not." "I know," Alexander said gently. "We've been so careful not to cross certain lines, both of us carrying our wounds, both terrified of hurting Emma or betraying the past. But Sophia, Rebecca's been gone for over a year now. And while I'll always love her, always honor what we had, I'm also still alive. And you've helped me remember what being alive feels like." "I'm not Rebecca," Sophia whispered. "I'll never be her. I can't replace. I don't want you to replace her." Alexander stepped closer, close enough to see the tears clinging to her lashes. "I want you to be yourself, the woman who brings sunshine into dark places, who raises her daughter with grace and strength, who saw a broken man and somehow helped him find pieces of himself he thought were lost forever." "What about David? He'll fight this. He'll say I'm being taken advantage of, that there's a power imbalance that." "Then let him fight." Alexander's voice was steel. "David has had 9 months to prove he's changed, to show up for his daughter, to be the father he claims he wants to be. He's failed at every turn. Meanwhile, I've been the one at every doctor's appointment, every bedtime, every nightmare. I'm the one Emma calls when she's scared. I'm the one she trusts to show up. That means something." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, and Alexander could see the war being waged behind her eyes. Hope battling fear, desire fighting practicality. "I need you to be honest with me," she finally said. Is this about Emma, or is this about me? Because I won't be with someone who's only with me to get to my daughter, even if that someone has been wonderful to her. It's about both of you, Alexander said truthfully. Emma came first, yes. She cracked me open when I was determined to stay closed. But Sophia, you've been there every step of the way. Making this place a home, showing me what grace looks like, being patient with my grief while dealing with your own wounds. I fell in love with Emma first, but I fell in love with you too. Slowly, quietly, in all the small moments between the big ones. In love. Sophia's voice broke on the words. Yes. Alexander took her hands in his. I love you. Not because you're Emma's mother, though that's part of it. I love you because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your terrible jokes, the way you sing in Spanish when you think no one's listening. I love you because you see all my broken pieces and somehow still think I'm worth keeping. Sophia pulled her hands free, and for a heart-stopping moment, Alexander thought she was pulling away entirely. Instead, she reached up to cup his face, her touch gentle and sure. I love you too, she whispered. I've been terrified to admit it, even to myself. You're my employer, you're still grieving, you're way out of my league in every possible way. But Alexander, you've shown me what it means when someone actually shows up. When promises are kept. When love is more than just words. So, what do we do? Alexander asked, hope blooming in his chest. We take it slow, Sophia said. We do this right for Emma's sake. We get therapy to work through the complicated parts. We let you formally adopt Emma first, establish that legally before we change our relationship. We make sure everyone knows this is genuine, that I'm not being coerced or taken advantage of. Okay, Alexander agreed. Whatever you need to feel safe. Whatever Emma needs. But Alexander? Sophia moved closer, and Alexander's breath caught. While we're being slow and careful about everything else, can I do one thing fast? What's that? Sophia rose on her toes and kissed him, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Alexander's first kiss since Rebecca, and it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like coming back to life, like a heart remembering how to beat properly after forgetting the rhythm. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying and smiling at the same time. That was definitely fast, Alexander said, his voice rough. I've wanted to do that for months, Sophia admitted. Every time you made Emma laugh, every time you sat up with her when she was sick, every time I caught you wearing that wedding ring and realized you were honoring the past while still being present for us. They stood there in the kitchen, foreheads touching, breathing each other in, while upstairs Emma slept peacefully, unaware that the family she'd willed into existence was finally becoming real. The adoption process took 6 months. David initially fought it, hiring lawyers and making threats, but his case fell apart under scrutiny. He'd missed more visits than he'd kept, failed drug tests, a development that shocked everyone, and couldn't produce evidence of the stable life he'd claimed to have built. When the judge asked Emma who she wanted as her father, she'd answered without hesitation. My daddy. The one who doesn't forget me. On a sunny April morning, exactly 18 months after Emma had first handed Alexander his wedding ring and called him daddy, they stood in a courthouse as a judge made it official. Emma wore a new dress, white with yellow sunflowers, and couldn't stop bouncing with excitement. Is this when you become my forever daddy? She asked for the 100th time. Yes, sweetheart, Alexander said, kneeling to her level. This is when we make promises in front of a judge, and those promises can't be broken. Like mommy, and you're gonna do soon? Emma asked with the gleeful lack of filter only a 4-year-old could manage. Sophia's face flushed as several people in the courtroom chuckled. Alexander and Sophia had gotten engaged quietly 2 months earlier, a simple proposal in the same kitchen where they'd first kissed, with Emma as their only witness. They planned to wait until after the adoption to announce it publicly, but Emma had never quite grasped the concept of secrets. Yes, Alexander said, giving up on subtlety, like Mommy and I are going to do soon. The hearing itself was brief. The judge reviewed the case, asked a few questions, and then smiled at Emma. Young lady, do you understand that if I approve this adoption, Alexander Hayes will be your legal father? He's already my father, Emma said with absolute certainty. We're just telling you about it so you know too. The judge laughed, a warm sound that filled the courtroom. Well, in that case, let's make it official. She signed the papers, stamped them, and just like that, Alexander was a father. Emma launched herself into his arms, squealing, "Daddy. Forever Daddy." While Sophia cried happy tears and Alexander held his daughter, and felt the last piece of his broken heart click into place. They celebrated at Emma's favorite pizza restaurant, just the three of them, keeping it simple and perfect. Emma chattered nonstop about being adopted, about how she couldn't wait to tell everyone at school that her daddy was forever now, about whether she could change her last name to Hayes, a discussion Alexander and Sophia had agreed to table until she was older. That night, after Emma was asleep in what was now legally her bedroom and what was now legally her home, Alexander and Sophia sat on the balcony overlooking the city. Alexander still wore his wedding ring on his right hand, and Sophia's engagement ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, glinted on her left. "Are you okay?" Sophia asked quietly. "Today was huge." "Today was perfect," Alexander said honestly. Then more carefully, "I did something though. This morning, before the hearing. I want to show you." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was the mantle in the living room, but the arrangement had changed. Rebecca's portrait still held pride of place, but beside it now sat a photo of Emma on Alexander's shoulders and another of the three of them together. Alexander, Sophia, and Emma. And next to those, Alexander had added a new portrait, Rebecca and Alexander's wedding photo, with a small plaque that read, "Thank you for teaching me how to love. I'm using that lesson well." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, that's beautiful." "I wanted her to be part of this," Alexander said. "Not as a ghost, but as a foundation. Rebecca made me the man who could be Emma's father, who could love you. She's not my past competing with my present. She's part of what built my present." "I wish I could have known her," Sophia said softly. "I think she would have liked you," Alexander said. "She always said I needed someone who would call me on my bullshit and make me remember to smile. You do both of those things." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, both marveling at the strange and beautiful way life had unfolded. Two broken people and a little girl had somehow built a family from scraps of grief and hope, and it was more real than anything Alexander had ever known. "Emma asked me something yesterday," Sophia said after a while. "She wanted to know if you were going to be her daddy forever, or if you might leave like David did." Alexander's heart clenched. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that you're the kind of person who keeps promises, who shows up even when it's hard, who chooses love every single day." Sophia turned to look at him. "And then she asked me how she could be sure, how she could know you wouldn't change your mind. And I showed her your wedding ring. I told her that you wear it every day to remember a promise you made to someone you loved, and that even though that person can't be here anymore, you still keep the promise by being the best version of yourself. I told her that's the kind of father you are, the kind who honors his commitments forever." Alexander felt tears streaming down his face. "That's a lot of faith to put in me." "You've earned it," Sophia said simply. "Every morning when Emma hands you that ring, you could refuse. You could pull away, protect yourself, keep your distance. Instead, you put it on and you show up. That's not obligation, Alexander. That's love." "I want to marry you," Alexander said suddenly. "Not in 6 months or a year.
Soon."
I want Emma to have parents who are married, who are committed, who are building this life together officially." "We said we'd go slow," Sophia reminded him, but she was smiling. "We have gone slow. 18 months of slowness." 18 months of therapy and legal processes, and being so careful about boundaries that we barely held hands in front of Emma. Alexander took Sophia's hands in his. But Sophia, I'm 40 years old. I've lost one love already. I've learned that slow doesn't guarantee anything except missing time we could have spent being happy. I don't want to wait anymore. What do you want? Sophia asked, the same question he'd asked her months ago. I want to wake up every morning in our bedroom, not separate rooms, ours. I want Emma to introduce us as mom and dad, married, a real family. I want to start trying for a baby if you want that. Give Emma a sibling. I want to build a life that honors my past while embracing our future. He paused. What do you want? Sophia was crying openly now, but her smile was radiant. I want all of that. I want to be your wife, Emma's mother, part of this family we've built. I want to give Emma siblings and stability and a home filled with laughter instead of tiptoeing around grief. Then let's do it, Alexander said. Let's get married. Something small, just us and Emma and whoever matters most. Let's make this official. They were married 6 weeks later in the penthouse, in front of the fireplace where Rebecca's portrait and their family photos now hung side by side. Emma was the flower girl, wearing another sunflower dress and taking her job with utmost seriousness. Alexander's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Margaret attended with her husband, dabbing her eyes and muttering that she'd seen this coming for months. The ceremony was simple. Alexander wore his wedding ring on his right hand, and when it came time for the new ring, Sophia had a surprise. She'd had his original wedding band engraved on the inside with new words, "Love travels forward." You can keep them both, she said softly as he stared at the rings. One to honor where you've been, one to celebrate where you're going. You don't have to choose between past and present, Alexander. You can hold both. In that moment, standing in his home with his daughter bouncing excitedly nearby and the woman he loved offering him permission to carry all his history into their future, Alexander felt completely whole for the first time since Rebecca's death. When Emma ran up to hug them both after the ceremony, nearly knocking them over with her enthusiasm, she looked at Alexander with shining eyes and said, "Now we're married too. All three of us." "Yes," Alexander agreed, lifting her up. "All three of us. Forever." That night, after Emma had finally been coaxed to bed still talking about the wedding, Alexander and Sophia stood together in front of the fireplace, looking at the photos that told the story of how they'd gotten here. "Do you think she's okay with this?" Sophia asked, nodding toward Rebecca's portrait. "Really?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, and then he smiled. "I think she's probably relieved. Rebecca always worried I'd work myself to death if she wasn't around to make me take breaks. She'd love that Emma bosses me around and that you've gotten me to leave the office before 8. She'd approve." "I'm going to choose to believe that," Sophia said, leaning into him. As they stood there, Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom, singing herself to sleep with a made-up song about families and forever and daddies who don't forget. And Alexander realized that this was what healing looked like, not forgetting the past or pretending it didn't hurt, but building something new with the lessons the past had taught. Emma had been right all along with her childish certainty. Love traveled. It moved forward, changed shape, found new homes in unexpected hearts. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love whispered through the voice of a 3-year-old holding a wedding ring, reminding you that you were still alive, still capable of being someone's forever daddy. Alexander took Sophia's hand, wore both his rings with equal pride, and stepped forward into the life that grief and hope had conspired to give him, a life where the past was honored, the present was celebrated, and the future was bright with the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through rooms that had learned to be happy again.